I should have seen it coming. The endless questions about property lines, mineral rights, how much the land was worth. But I was busy. I was grieving. I wanted my daughter to be happy. So when she walked down the aisle, I was smiling. Right up until she reached the altar, placed a folded piece of paper in my hand, hidden in her bouquet, and I read 4 words that changed everything. That's when I realized he'd made a critical mistake. I stood up. Everyone watched, and the truth came spilling out. Welcome back to our channel. You're about to hear a story about deception protection and the strength of family bonds. Before we dive in, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts and know where you're tuning in from. Important disclaimer: this story is based on real patterns of financial exploitation and manipulation. Names and specific details have been changed for privacy, but the warning signs, the tactics, and the ultimate message about protecting what matters most, those are entirely true. The sun hadn't yet cleared the peaks of the Mission Mountains when I stepped out onto the ridge. Early morning was my favorite time at Whitehorn before the ranch hands arrived, before the day demanded its due. Just me, the cold air sharp enough to cut, and 500 acres of land that had taken everything I had to build. I stood there in the darkness, my breath coming in white clouds, and looked down at what we'd created. Whitehorn Cattle Company sprawled across the valley like a living thing, weathered barns, white fencing that caught the first light pastures, where Angus cattle were already moving, searching for the best grass before the snow came deeper. The main house sat just below its windows, dark, waiting. Empty now for 3 years. The wind cut across my face, and I pulled my coat tighter. At 68, I didn't bounce back from the cold the way I used to. My hands were rough from decades of engineering work. Before the patents started paying out, rough still from ranch work I insisted on doing myself. The kind of hands that don't know how to be idle. I walked toward the north pasture, my boots crunching on the frozen ground, and let my mind drift backward like it always did on these quiet mornings. Helen would have loved this morning. She was always the one who noticed the small things, the exact shade of blue the sky turned right before sunrise, the way the snow clung to the pine branches in perfect white lines. She used to drag me out of bed just to see moments like this, laughing at my sleepiness, insisting that you couldn't really live if you slept through sunrise. I learned eventually that she was right. Most things in life worth having require waking up early. We bought this land together in 1994. 200 acres back then, nothing but scrubland and dream. She saw potential where I saw work. She saw beauty where I calculated value. It took us 8 years of saving, scrimping, doing everything ourselves. I fixed the barns while she planted flowers around the house, roses that somehow took hold in this unforgiving soil, as if they understood that survival here meant being stubborn. By the time we had the full 500, we were the kind of exhausted that comes from building something real. The kind that settles into your bones and becomes part of you. 3 years ago, I'd scattered some of her ashes here in that garden she'd loved so fiercely. The roses are still growing. I made my way down to the north pasture, checking the fence line like I did most mornings. At my age, checking things twice was just good sense. The cattle lifted their heads as I passed, recognizing me uninterested. I'd never had Helen's gift for talking to animals. She used to stand out here and have full conversations with the cows, naming the favorites, remembering their calves and temperaments. I just made sure they were fed and healthy and that the wolves stayed away. The business side of Whitehorn had changed a lot in the past decade. Lithium deposits had been discovered in the region, something the initial surveys had missed back in '94. The value of the land had climbed in ways I never expected. Developers started calling, offering obscene amounts. 7 figures. Then 8. I'd turned them all down. This land wasn't for sale. It was for keeping. The way you keep a promise. I was standing at the fence, running my hand along the weathered wood, when I felt the emptiness again. The kind that doesn't go away, just sits there in your chest, like a stone that's become part of your weight. I was good at what I'd built here. Good at the business, the cattle, the land management. I'd made smart choices, kept the operation lean and profitable. The money I'd made from my patents' modest components used in industrial refrigeration systems that had somehow become essential to half the world's cold storage, that money had grown into something substantial through careful investing. 12 million in assets now. More than enough. More than I'd ever wanted. But money doesn't keep you company on cold mornings. Money doesn't laugh at your jokes or tell you you're being stubborn when you need to hear it. Money doesn't plant flowers. I heard the sound before I saw anything, an engine coming up the long drive that led to the house. Not one of my hands. I knew the sound of their trucks the way you know the sound of your own heartbeat. This was different. Newer. Expensive sounding. I checked my watch. Not even 7 yet. Company at sunrise wasn't in my usual routine, which meant something was off. I started walking back toward the house, my mind already running through possibilities. Medical emergency. I'd talked to Victoria just last week. She'd sounded fine. Better than fine. The truck came into view as I crested the ridge above the drive. Black Audi, Denver plates. Definitely not from around here. I watched it pull up to the house, watched a man step out, tall, well-dressed, the kind of casual that costs money. Young, mid-30s maybe. He stood looking up at the house like he was assessing its value, and something in that look made my chest tighten. Then I understood, or thought I did. Victoria, my daughter, my brilliant, hopeful, sometimes too trusting daughter, who lived in Denver doing marketing work for some tech company I'd never quite understood. She'd mentioned something about meeting someone 6 months ago. Hadn't made a big deal of it. But I was her father, and I knew the sound of something important being left unsaid between the lines of casual conversation. This must be him. I stood on the ridge, unmoving, and watched the stranger turn in a slow circle, taking in the ranch, the mountains, the scale of it all. His hands were in his pockets. His face was pleasant. He looked at my home the way a buyer looks at a house they're thinking about purchasing. Something in my gut twisted. The same instinct that had kept me alive through business dealings, that had made me a good engineer, the ability to see when something didn't add up. I couldn't have said exactly what it was. The way he held himself, maybe. The way his eyes calculated distance and space. Or maybe it was just the fact that Victoria hadn't called me to say he was coming. I started walking down toward the house, moving slow, taking my time. There was no hurry. I wanted to get a closer look at this man who'd driven 6 hours before dawn to see my daughter's home. I wanted to understand why her voice had sounded different when she'd mentioned him last week. By the time I reached the bottom of the ridge, he'd gone inside. I could see him through the window of the main room, the room where Helen had arranged furniture, where she'd hung paintings, where she'd wanted the light to fall just right in the afternoons. He stood there looking around, taking inventory. The cold had nothing to do with the chill I felt moving down my spine. The phone buzzed in my pocket, just as I reached the back porch. I almost didn't answer. I was still watching that Audi through the kitchen window, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But the caller ID showed Victoria, and there was something urgent in the way it kept vibrating against my ribs. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, picking up. "Psst." Her voice came through bright and breathless, the way it used to when she was excited about something as a kid. "Dad, I have the best news. I'm getting married." I stopped walking. Stopped thinking for a second, actually. "Victoria, that's wonderful, honey. Congratulations. Tell me about him." There was that moment, the millisecond before she started talking, where I already knew something was off. Not wrong exactly, just fast. Too fast. She'd mentioned a guy named Vincent maybe 6 months ago. Light stuff. Met someone at a networking thing, pretty cool. And then silence on it for months. Now this. He's amazing, Dad. His name is Vincent Hutchinson. He's 37, works as an investment advisor in Denver. He's so smart and kind and... She paused and I could hear her smiling through the phone. He proposed at this incredible restaurant downtown. It just happened last week. We wanted to tell you in person, but I couldn't wait. I'm sorry, I know this is fast, but... Slow down, I said, but not unkindly. How long have you two been together? 4 months. Well, dating about 4 months. We've been talking longer. 4 months. From dating to engaged in 4 months. My engineer's mind started cataloging that information like it was a failed component. Too many variables, not enough testing time. Victoria. I'm happy for you. I really am. I said, and I meant it. Mostly. But help me understand. How well do you really know this man? What do his family's backgrounds look like? His finances, his... She cut me off, and now there was a defensiveness in her voice that I recognized. It was the same tone she'd used at 16 when I'd asked questions about her high school boyfriend. He's not some guy I picked up at a bar. He's educated, successful, and he loves me. I'm not doubting that, sweetheart. I'm asking because I'm your father. That's what fathers do. I know, she said softer now, and I appreciate it, but you'll see when you meet him. He's perfect, Dad. Seriously, everything just makes sense with him. Everything makes sense. That phrase sat wrong with me. Life, in my experience, didn't make that kind of sense. Life was compromise and calculation and slow building. Life with Helen had made sense because we'd built it together brick by brick over decades. Sense wasn't something that just happened in 4 months. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, when am I meeting him? Actually, that's the other part. He's here. He wanted to see the ranch, and I couldn't get away from work until tomorrow morning, so he drove up this morning. I'm coming tomorrow, I'll be there by evening. Can you make sure there's room for us both? And that's when I saw the Audi pull up outside. Through the window, I watched a man unfold himself from the driver's seat, tall, clean-cut, the kind of put-together that comes from gym memberships and expensive haircuts. He had on jeans that probably cost more than my weekly groceries and a button-down shirt that was casually perfect. He stood in the driveway for a moment, just taking in the view, and the way his eyes moved across the landscape was like a surveyor's. Measuring. Calculating. He's pulling up now, Victoria was saying. Put him on. Or you want to just meet him? I'll meet him, I said. We'll talk later, okay? I ended the call just as Vincent stepped onto the porch. He had a smile ready before he saw me, the kind practiced enough that it felt like it had been rehearsed. Up close, he was handsome in an obvious way. Expensive watch. Teeth too white. Handshake that was firm but not threatening, calibrated just right. So, Mr. Harrison, he said, and his voice had that smooth quality that comes from sales training. Vincent Hutchinson. It's an honor to meet you. Martin, I said. Just Martin. Welcome to Whitehorn. He turned, taking in the ranch with this expression of wonder that somehow felt performed. His eyes moved across the barns, the fencing, the pastures stretching out toward the mountains. Then he looked back at the house, at Helen's roses still blooming, despite the cold stubborn as hell, like she'd been, and something almost like hunger flickered across his face before he caught himself. This is incredible, he said. Victoria never did it justice when she described it. The scale of the operation is just impressive, Martin. How long have you been running Whitehorn? About 30 years now. We started smaller. His ears perked up at that word. My wife, Helen, and I. She passed away 3 years ago. I'm sorry to hear that, he said, and he sounded like he meant it, which made it worse somehow. But she built something remarkable here with you. This land. He gestured at the valley spread out below us. It's valuable, not just in terms of acreage, but location, water rights, all of it. I watched him carefully. You know about water rights? I work in investments, he said with a self-deprecating smile. You learn to spot value wherever it is. I'm just curious, what's the actual scope of your operation here? How many acres total? About 500, I said. His eyebrows rose a fraction. That's substantial. And you manage all of it yourselves. I have help. Ranch hands, seasonal workers. But the land itself, the property, you own it outright. There was something in the precision of that question that made my instincts go quiet and still. The way he asked wasn't casual curiosity. It was targeted, specific, like he was checking boxes on a list. We do, I said carefully. He smiled again, that practiced smile. Just thinking about the potential. Land like this with those kinds of views and this close to Denver development zones, there are developers who'd be very interested. Have you ever considered what you might do with it? Long-term expansion investment partnerships? Maybe even development rights? I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite dread. More like a warning system activating. The way you feel when you're looking at a bridge and suddenly notice the cables aren't quite right. Not really, I said. The ranch is what we built with Helen. It's not for sale. Of course not, he said smoothly. I didn't mean to suggest, I just meant in terms of your personal goals. Planning for the future. Victoria's future. These are the kinds of conversations successful people have. You know how to leverage what you've built. The word leverage sat between us like a stone. I'll keep that in mind, I said. He was still smiling, but something in the way his eyes didn't quite match his expression reminded me of how a predator looks at prey that hasn't realized it's being hunted yet. You should, he said. The world is full of opportunity for people smart enough to recognize it. We stood there on the porch, the cold air sharp between us, and I realized I was already making decisions, already calculating, already deciding that this man, this charming, well-dressed man who'd driven 6 hours before dawn to see a ranch that supposedly wasn't worth mentioning, this man was not here for my daughter, or he was here for her. But not in the way Victoria believed. Something in the way he'd asked about the property line made my instincts go on full alert. Vincent came back 2 weeks later, not invited. That detail stuck with me, the kind of thing that doesn't add up when you're used to people doing what makes sense. I was checking fence line in the north pasture when I heard the engine. Dave, my foreman, glanced over from where he was working, but didn't say anything. He understood. When I reached the porch, Vincent was already there, studying the land, like a man taking inventory of an asset. Hope you don't mind, he said, that practiced smile already in place. Had a meeting in the area. Thought I'd swing by, see the place in better light. Denver was 3 hours away. There were no meetings out here, but I let it go. We walked the property, and the questions started almost immediately. Where exactly does your property end? He asked, pointing toward the tree line where the forest began. Just curious about the boundaries. Ridgeline right there, I said. We had survey markers installed back in '94 when we established the boundary. Still there if you look close. He nodded, but his eyes kept moving, calculating distances, taking measurements, with something that wasn't quite curiosity. Ever had it resurveyed? Sometimes these older surveys miss things. Mineral deposits, that kind of thing. First real question, not about cattle or operations or Helen's roses, about what was underneath the dirt. He came back the following Sunday. This time I'd pulled the deed out the night before, not to show him, but because I wanted to refresh my own memory. Whitehorn, 500 acres, purchased in 1994 for $80,000. Current valuation approximately 5.5 million, maybe more, depending on how the lithium situation developed. Lithium was becoming valuable. Developers were starting to sniff around Montana. We sat on the porch with coffee and he leaned back in the chair like he owned it. The lithium deposits in this region are starting to attract serious developer attention, he said. Ever consider what those deposits might actually be worth? I mean, just from a pure business perspective. The way he phrased it was careful, calculated, like he was testing to see how much I knew about my own land. Not really, when I said, You should. Seriously. I work in investments, and I'm telling you, a man your age, you've built something impressive here. But you also need to think about what comes next. Legacy, security, making sure Victoria's taken care of. He said her name like she was already part of his inventory. He left around 3 that afternoon. Mentioned something about needing to get back to the city. The following weekend, he was back. We didn't even do the pretense of catching up. We just walked the land, and he asked. Different angles now. Water rights. Whether I'd ever considered selling off parcels, development potential, property taxes, like he was building a complete map of everything I owned and how vulnerable it was. Victoria mentioned you were thinking about expanding operations, he said, as we stood looking out at the valley. Adding more cattle, diversifying maybe. That takes capital, doesn't it? Have you thought about how you'd fund something like that? I hadn't told him about expanding. Victoria must have mentioned it. Must be keeping him informed about my business discussions. That one stuck with me in a different way. By the 5th visit, and there were 5 visits. In 3 weeks, each one arriving without warning, I'd stopped pretending to myself about what was happening. I was cataloging everything now. Not written down, but precise. The questions had evolved beyond casual curiosity into something targeted and specific. Each visit built on the previous one. Each question revealed a little more about what he was actually looking for. Water rights, property taxes, county records, estate planning, title holders, who managed the business. What happened if something happened to me? He wasn't asking the questions of a man interested in ranching or in Victoria in any romantic sense. He was asking the questions of a man doing an assessment, a man calculating leverage. I was in the equipment barn checking some maintenance issues when Dave brought it up. Vincent not coming by today, Dave asked, casual as anything. I looked up from the tool I was holding. Why do you say that, Man's been here pretty regular lately, Dave said. Every few days like clockwork. Figured it was becoming a pattern. Pattern. That word did something to my mind. It organized everything I'd been sensing into something concrete. Pattern. Not chance, not coincidence, not just a young man wanting to know his fiancé's family home. Pattern. Vincent wasn't here for Victoria. Or he was, but not in the way Victoria believed. He was here because he was looking for something specific, something underneath the surface, something that was worth money. I thought about Helen, about how she'd always said that people showed you who they were if you paid attention. You just had to be willing to see it. I was paying attention now. That evening, I sat in my study, the same room where I'd watched Vincent assess everything, and did something I'd been avoiding. I typed his name into my computer. Vincent Hutchinson. The search results came back clean. Investment advisor, licensed, professional photos, nothing obviously wrong. But there was something about the perfection of it all that made my engineer's mind start asking different kinds of questions. I thought about the way he'd looked at the ranch that first time. Not like a man looking at his future home with the woman he loved. Like a man looking at a problem. Like he was already mentally solving for how to make it work in his favor. And I knew, with the kind of certainty that comes from trusting your gut after 68 years of being alive, that I needed to understand exactly who this man was. Not who he pretended to be for Victoria, Not the charming investment advisor with the expensive watch and the rehearsed smile. Who he actually was. I decided to confront him directly. At dinner, just the three of us. Victoria had texted earlier in the day saying Vincent would be stopping by for the evening. She'd offered to cook, but I'd told her I'd handle it. I made my famous elk stew, something Helen had taught me years ago, and set the table in the dining room, the one with the big windows that looked out at the mountains. Helen had wanted that room to be special, reserved for moments that mattered. This was one of those moments. Vincent arrived around 6, bringing a bottle of wine that probably cost more than it needed to. He was in good spirits, making jokes about the drive, complimenting the kitchen smells, doing his charming routine. Victoria was glowing, relaxed in a way she hadn't been since they'd gotten engaged. Seeing her that happy under normal circumstances would have made me feel like I'd done something right as a father. But these weren't normal circumstances. We sat down to eat. The stew was good, warm, rich, the kind of comfort food that tastes like history. For a while we made conversation. Vincent asked about the ranch, about cattle operations, about how long I'd been in business. I answered his questions with measured precision, volunteering nothing, making him work for every piece of information. Around halfway through the meal, Victoria excused herself to get dessert from the kitchen. That's when I made my move. "Seconded," I said, setting down my fork carefully. "I'm curious about something. Your financial situation. Your actual financial situation. Can you walk me through it?" He stopped mid-chew. Actually paused with food in his mouth before swallowing. "Sorry, what do you mean?" "I mean details," I said. "Where does your money come from? How much are you making? What are your assets? Your debts? Your investments? The things a man typically knows about himself." "Martin, that's..." He laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that sounds like someone testing water before diving. "That's kind of personal, don't you think?" I don't," I said. "Not when you're planning to marry my daughter. I think it's fair to know whether you can support her, whether you have your finances in order, whether there are surprises hiding in your background." He set down his own fork, took a sip of wine. "Look, I appreciate where you're coming from, but this is between me and Victoria. Our financial situation is our business. It becomes my business when my daughter is involved," I said. "So here's what I'm asking. Can you provide me with your recent tax returns? Your bank statements, a full accounting of your financial position?" "No," he said flatly. "I'm not going to do that." "Why not?" I leaned forward slightly. "If everything is as solid as you say it is, there shouldn't be anything to hide. It's not about hiding anything. It's about privacy. It's about trust. If you trusted your daughter's judgment, you wouldn't need to inspect my finances like I'm some kind of investment you're evaluating." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I'm a father who's learned to ask hard questions before letting someone into his family." Victoria appeared in the doorway holding a pie, and immediately sensed the tension. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between us. "Your father is interrogating me about my bank account." Vincent said, his tone managing to sound hurt and reasonable at the same time. "He's implying I'm not good enough financially to marry you." "That's not what I'm doing," I said calmly. "I'm asking basic questions any responsible parent would ask. Dad, why are you doing this?" Victoria set the pie down on the table, her face flushed. "Vincent is educated. He has a good job. He's not some guy I picked up at a bar. I didn't say he was. But you're treating him like he's suspect." She said, her voice rising slightly. You're being rude. You're being disrespectful." I looked at Vincent. He was watching this play out with an expression that was almost satisfied. Like he'd anticipated exactly this outcome. Like Victoria's defense of him was part of some calculation he'd already made. "Vincent," I said, keeping my voice level, "if you have nothing to hide, why won't you share your tax returns?" "Because," he said slowly, like he was talking to someone who wasn't quite understanding him, A man has a right to financial privacy. I don't need to prove myself to you, Martin. I need to prove myself to Victoria, and I have. Have you? I asked. Or has she just not thought to ask the same questions I'm asking? Victoria stood up. This is completely unfair. You're putting me in an impossible position. Vincent, I'm so sorry about this. She put her hand on his shoulder, and he covered it with his, looking up at her with an expression of hurt nobility. Like he was the one being wronged here. Like he was taking it gracefully. It's okay, he said. Your father's just trying to protect you. I understand. But what I understood was something different. I understood that Vincent had already calculated for this moment. He'd already figured out how to turn my protective questions into me being the unreasonable one. How to make Victoria feel like she had to defend him. How to position himself as the victim of an unfair interrogation, which meant he'd done this before. I need Vincent. I said one more time, I'm going to ask you one final question. Why did you really come to this ranch that first time before Victoria could get time off work to come with you? He smiled. But it was different now. The warmth had dropped away. Because I wanted to see where Victoria came from, to understand her better, to see the home that made her. No, I said. You wanted to see the land. You wanted to calculate its value. You wanted to know if it was worth the effort you're putting into this. For just a moment, just a fraction of a second, his expression flickered. The mask slipped. I saw something underneath. Something cold and assessing. Something that confirmed everything my instincts had been telling me. Then it was gone. The smile came back. The charm reassembled itself. Martin, he said, his voice smooth again. I think you're seeing threats where there aren't any. I love your daughter. That's all that matters. Not yet, I said quietly. That's not all that matters. Not yet. I could feel Victoria's confusion, her hurt, her loyalty being pulled in two directions. But I also knew that I was right. And I knew that Vincent had just made a critical mistake. He'd let me see for just a moment what was actually underneath all that charm. He would be more careful now, more guarded. But the pattern had been established. The first confrontation was over. Now I needed proof. That night I called Jennifer Walsh, my attorney. We'd been working together for nearly 15 years, had handled everything from the business registration of Whitehorn to Helen's will when she passed. Jennifer understood me. She understood that when I called after 9 at night, it wasn't casual. Jennifer, I said when she picked up, I need you to look into someone for me. There was a pause. I could almost hear her sitting back in her chair, shifting from evening relaxation mode into professional mode. This about Victoria's fiancé? She asked. Victoria, that was what she'd called Victoria since they'd first met at some legal seminar years ago. How did you know? Because you've called me exactly twice in 15 years after 9 p.m., and both times were about Victoria, she said dryly. What's going on? I told her. Not everything, but enough. The pattern of questions about the property, the way he'd calculated the land's value, the confrontation at dinner, the mask slip that lasted just a fraction of a second. You want a background check, Jennifer said. It wasn't a question. I want to know if I'm paranoid or if something is actually wrong, I said. I want to know who this man really is. I know someone, Jennifer said. Guy named Thomas Price. Best investigator I've worked with. Discreet, thorough, fast. I'll call him tonight. He should be able to start first thing tomorrow. Thomas Price turned out to be exactly what Jennifer had promised. When I met him at my office the next morning, he was calm, methodical, the kind of man who listened more than he talked. Mid-50s with the kind of weathered face that comes from 20 years of asking hard questions. So, he said, pulling out a notebook. Vincent Hutchinson, investment advisor in Denver. Engaged to your daughter 4 months after meeting her. That about right? Close enough, I said. And you've got a gut feeling something's off. I've got more than a gut feeling, I said. I've got a pattern. He keeps asking about property lines, mineral surveys, water rights development potential. He asked Victoria about my business expansion plans. He showed up at my ranch without invitation. He's not here because he's interested in me or ranching. He's here because he wants to know about my assets. Thomas wrote all that down. Anything else? He had this moment at dinner when I pushed him on his finances. His mask slipped. Just for a second. But I saw something underneath. Something cold. Thomas nodded, made another note. I'm going to dig into his financials, his background, his employment history. But I'm also going to look into something else. His romantic history. How many times has he been engaged? Has he ever had engagements that ended suddenly? Why would you ask that? I said, though I already suspected the answer. Because men like this, if he really is what you think he is, they have patterns. They don't just stumble into this with your daughter. This is probably something he's done before. 3 days later, Jennifer called me at the ranch. You might want to sit down for this, she said. I did. Thomas had found them. 2 previous engagements. The first one was with Rebecca Thornton, daughter of a technology CEO in Silicon Valley. They'd been engaged for 5 months. The engagement ended abruptly 2 weeks after Vincent had attended a family meeting about the Thornton estate structure and inheritance planning. The second was with Sarah Mitchell, daughter of a prominent real estate developer in Colorado. 4 months of engagement. Ended right after Sarah's father had revised his will and restructured his trust arrangements, things that Vincent had been specifically asking about. Both families were reluctant to talk about it, Jennifer said carefully. But when Thomas did some digging, both fathers admitted they'd become suspicious of Vincent's intentions. Both suspected he was after access to family finances. But neither had concrete proof, and they didn't want the publicity or the legal complications. They just paid to make the problem go away quietly. Paid, I said. Settlement money, quietly handled. It's not uncommon with wealthy families. Easier than scandal. Easier than a trial. I felt something heavy settle into my chest. So he's done this before. Apparently he's very good at it, Jennifer said. And Martin, I think you should know something else. We found no evidence of significant personal wealth. His bank accounts are modest. His investments are small. Whatever he's claiming about his financial stability, it's not backed up by actual assets. He appears to be living a lifestyle he can't actually afford. That meant something. It meant he needed the money. It meant my daughter's future inheritance, or at least his perception of what it might be, was the target. Thomas arrived at my office the following afternoon with a folder. I've got photographs, financial records, email exchanges, he said, laying it all out. Rebecca Thornton's engagement was structured almost identically to your daughter's. Fast courtship, rapid engagement, immediate questions about family finances and inheritance structures. When the father got suspicious and started checking Vincent's background, Vincent backed off. Said he'd been having second thoughts. Made it look like his choice to end it. And the second one, same pattern, different details. Sarah Mitchell is a real estate developer's daughter. Vincent wanted to know about her father's holdings, his investment portfolio, his plans for the business. When the father caught wind of the questions and started asking uncomfortable ones, the engagement ended. Vincent claimed he wasn't ready for marriage after all. So he's a con artist, I said flatly. That's what it looks like, Thomas said. Though I couldn't prove it in a court of law yet. Both families settled quietly. No lawsuits, no public accusations. But the pattern is clear. He targets women from wealthy families, asks specific questions about their parents' assets, and then when he gets what he needs, or when he's caught, he moves on. "What about my daughter?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "What does he want from her?" "Based on what you've told me about your ranch, your lifestyle, your assets, he probably wants access to you," Thomas said. "He's younger, he's charming, he's got credentials as an investment advisor. He probably planned to get close to you through Victoria. Get your trust. Get financial power of attorney. Then either convince you to invest in something, or worst case scenario, wait for something to happen to you and manage the estate." What do you mean, something to happen to me?" Thomas met my eyes steadily. "I mean, he might not be planning to wait for natural causes. A man like this, a man with this pattern, he's not constrained by normal rules. I've seen worse." The folder sat on my desk between us, full of photographs and documents that proved Vincent Hutchinson wasn't the man he claimed to be. He was a predator, and he'd targeted my daughter. I looked at Thomas. "What do I do?" "Right now," he said, "you need more proof. You need something that puts him in a corner. You need evidence he can't talk his way around. The background check proves he's a liar, but it doesn't prove intent. For that, we'd need to catch him planning something, actually stating his intentions." "How do we do that?" I asked. Thomas smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. "We give him rope. We let him think he's winning, and we record everything." Thomas Price sent me a file, not email physical, delivered to my office. When I opened it and started reading, I understood why he'd insisted on that. Rebecca Thornton. The photograph showed a woman in her mid-30s smiling at the camera, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. According to the file, she was the daughter of James Thornton, founder and CEO of Nexus Technology, a company worth approximately $700 million. Rebecca worked in venture capital herself, successful independent, the kind of woman who should have been able to see through a con artist. The timeline made my chest tight. Rebecca and Vincent met through mutual friends in Silicon Valley. They dated for approximately 4 months before he proposed at an upscale restaurant in San Francisco. Fast. But not so fast that it would raise immediate red flags. Young professionals, both successful, both financially independent. Why not accelerate things? But then Vincent started asking questions. The file included email excerpts, things Thomas had managed to recover from public records and sources I didn't ask about. Vincent asking Rebecca about her father's business structure, asking about trusts and succession planning, asking about inheritance structures and how her father's will was written. At first, the questions seemed casual, the kind of thing a future son-in-law might ask about. But they escalated, became more specific, more targeted. How much was the company worth? Who controlled it? What were the succession plans? What if something happened to James? How was the estate structured? Rebecca's father started paying attention when Vincent requested to attend a family meeting about estate restructuring. That was the line. That was when James Thornton realized his daughter's fiancé wasn't interested in Rebecca as a person. He was interested in the Thornton fortune. James Thornton had his daughter's fiancé investigated. What he found wasn't pretty. But before he could act on it, before he could tell Rebecca what he'd learned, Vincent ended the engagement. Said he'd been having doubts. Said he wasn't ready for marriage after all. Said he thought they'd moved too fast. 2 weeks. From the estate meeting to the breakup was 2 weeks. The file noted that James Thornton had then settled with Vincent quietly. A payment that made the problem disappear. Rebecca, according to notes in the file, had been devastated. She didn't understand what had happened. As far as she knew, the man she was going to marry had just decided to leave. She had no idea it was because her father had caught him trying to infiltrate the family finances. I kept reading. Sarah Mitchell. Daughter of David Mitchell, developer and investor in Colorado real estate. Worth approximately $400 million. Sarah worked in her father's business, which meant she understood real estate, understood development, understood money. The pattern started the same way. meeting through social circles, fast dating, rapid engagement, 4 months from meeting to proposal. But then came the questions. How much land did the company own? How were the holdings structured? What was the company's debt situation? What were her father's plans for the next 5 years? How was the business succession planned? Vincent managed to get himself invited to meetings, wanted to understand the family business, wanted to be involved in planning with his future in-laws, wanted to know the details of investments and property holdings and development timelines. David Mitchell didn't wait as long as James Thornton had. He caught on faster. He paid for a background check on Vincent, the same kind Thomas had done for me. He found the Rebecca Thornton situation. He found Vincent's real estate holdings were modest at best. He found that Vincent's actual financial situation was nowhere near what he claimed. When David confronted Vincent, Vincent didn't deny it. He just ended the engagement. Said he'd been second-guessing the relationship. Said he thought Sarah deserved someone more focused on their own career. 2 weeks after Sarah's father restructured his trust and made his new plans for business succession, Vincent was gone. And David Mitchell, like James Thornton before him, had paid settlement money to make the whole thing disappear quietly. Not because they'd done anything wrong, but because wealthy families don't like scandal, don't like having their private financial structures become public knowledge, don't like their daughters' failed engagements making headlines. So both had paid, both had stayed quiet, both had let Vincent walk away to find his next target. I sat back in my study chair and looked at the timeline Thomas had created. The pattern was undeniable. Get close to daughter, establish credibility, gain trust, ask increasingly specific questions about family finances, get caught or achieve access, end engagement, move on. It had worked twice. It would work again if I didn't stop it. Victoria, my daughter, who believed she was marrying a man who loved her, who didn't know that every compliment he'd given her was calculated. Every question he'd asked about my business and my retirement and my plans for the future was strategic. Every visit to the ranch had been a survey mission. He was doing the same thing to her that he'd done to Rebecca and Sarah. The timeline was almost identical. The questions were the same. The pattern was executing perfectly. And in 2 weeks he would marry my daughter and position himself to access everything I'd spent 30 years building. 2 weeks until the wedding. 2 weeks to gather enough evidence that Victoria would believe me. 2 weeks to stop him before he made it legal. I picked up the phone and called Jennifer. "How quickly can you get me more evidence?" I asked. "What kind of evidence?" she said. "The kind that would convince a woman her fiancé is a predator," I said. "The kind that would stand up in court if we need it to." "That depends," Jennifer said carefully. "What are you willing to do?" I thought about Rebecca Thornton devastated because her father had protected her. I thought about Sarah Mitchell confused about why her fiancé had suddenly disappeared. I thought about the money both families had paid to keep the scandal quiet. "Anything," I said. "I'll do anything." Vincent stopped by the ranch on a Saturday. He had a briefcase with him, the kind of thing that belonged in a lawyer's office, not in my kitchen. But there he was, setting it down on the dining table like he had every right to be there, like he owned the space. "Martin," he said, settling into a chair like it was his own home, "I've been thinking about your financial situation, about your future. I want to help." I was careful not to let anything show on my face. I'd spent the past 3 days reading Rebecca Thornton's file, studying Sarah Mitchell's case, understanding exactly what was about to happen. Now Vincent was walking into the trap I'd decided to set. "Help how?" And I asked. "Well," he said, opening the briefcase with practiced ease. "As an investment advisor, I see this all the time. Successful men who've built something real, but who haven't necessarily structured their financial lives in the most efficient way. I think you fall into that category." He pulled out a stack of documents. printed on expensive paper professionally formatted. The kind of thing that would look legitimate to someone who didn't know better. "I've prepared some documents that I think would really streamline everything for you," he said. "First, this power of attorney form would let me help manage your accounts if you ever needed it. Handle the day-to-day stuff, investments, that kind of thing." I looked at the document. It was a financial power of attorney, exactly the kind of thing a predator would want. Once signed, Vincent could access my accounts, move money, make transfers without any oversight or approval from me. "Why would I need that?" I asked. "Because you're 68 years old, Martin," he said, his voice taking on that smooth, reasonable tone that I now recognized as a weapon. "What if something happened? What if you had a stroke? What if you fell and broke your hip? Who would manage your affairs? Then you'd want someone you trust to be able to step in." "I have a daughter," I said. "Victoria could handle it." "Could she?" Vincent leaned back, the picture of confidence. "Your daughter is busy with her own career. An investment advisor would have more expertise. Plus," he smiled, "I'm going to be family. I should be in a position to help." There was something in how he said it. Not a question about whether I wanted him involved. A statement of fact. He was already assuming his place in my life, in my business, in my finances. "Let's say I did sign this," I said carefully. "What else?" He turned to the next document. "This is a trust structure. Instead of having your assets pass directly to Victoria through your will, they'd be held in a revocable living trust. Much more tax efficient, protects against probate, keeps the estate private, and..." He paused for effect. "It allows for a trustee to manage everything if you became incapacitated." And who would that trustee be? I already knew the answer. "Well, ideally family," he said. "So Victoria could be the primary trustee, but you'd want a backup. Someone with financial expertise. Someone who understands business. I could take on that role." "How could you?" I said flatly. "I could." He slid the document across the table toward me. "You'd need a lawyer to set this up properly, of course. But I've drafted the basic framework here. It would give you peace of mind knowing everything is structured correctly." "Peace of mind," I repeated. "I'm Martin," he said. And now there was an edge creeping into his voice, a subtle one, but there. "I know you might feel like these are private matters, but you also need to be realistic about your situation. You're a successful man with significant assets. You're living alone. You don't have a clear succession plan. What happens if something happens to you? Your daughter inherits everything. Yes, but who manages it? Who protects it? Who makes sure the money isn't squandered or mismanaged?" He was painting a picture now. A picture where I was alone, vulnerable, and desperately in need of his help. Where without him, my daughter would be lost, confused, unable to manage the empire I'd built. It was manipulation disguised as concern. "I appreciate the thought," I said. "But I think these are decisions I need to make carefully, with my own lawyer, in my own time." "Of course," Vincent said smoothly, though I caught the tightening around his eyes. "But don't wait too long, Martin. Life is unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen. The sooner you get these things structured, the better positioned you'll be to protect what you've built." It was a threat dressed up as advice, a warning disguised as wisdom. After he left, I sat in my study for a long time just thinking. Vincent had made his move. He'd shown his hand more clearly than he probably realized. He'd revealed that he wasn't just interested in courting my daughter. He was already planning his takeover. He was already moving chess pieces into position. The power of attorney would have given him access to my cash. The trust structure would have positioned him to control everything if I died or became incapacitated. Both documents were designed for the exact same purpose they'd served with Rebecca Thornton and Sarah Mitchell. And the urgency in his voice, the pressure about not waiting too long, that was the key. Vincent didn't have time to play a long game. He needed results. He needed to get the documents signed, get the access secured before something changed. Before Victoria found out who he really was. Before someone else figured it out. He was accelerating the plan because time was running out. The wedding was less than 2 weeks away. After that, when he was married to Victoria, when he was legally part of the family, the pressure could ease. But before that, before the wedding made everything official, he needed insurance. He needed the power of attorney. He needed the trust. I picked up the phone and called Thomas. "He's making his move," I said. "He just tried to get me to sign power of attorney documents. He's pushing hard. He's running out of time." "Good," Thomas said. "That means he's getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. When can you get me copies of those documents?" "I'll have them tomorrow," I said. "Perfect," Thomas said. "We need to catch him now, while he's committed, while he's all in on this plan. Once he thinks he's won, once he has the legal access, he'll be more careful. We need evidence while he's still hungry for the kill." After I hung up, I sat back and thought about everything that was about to happen. In 2 weeks, there would be a wedding. Before that wedding happened, I had to stop Vincent. I had to gather enough evidence that Victoria would see the truth. I had to protect my daughter from a man who saw her as nothing more than an entry point to fortune. The briefcase full of documents sat on my table, and I realized something. Vincent was counting on my fear. He was counting on me being an old man who was afraid of being alone, afraid of leaving things unorganized, afraid of what might happen if something went wrong. But Vincent had miscalculated. He didn't know that I'd learned to trust my instincts over 68 years. He didn't know that I could see predators because I'd learned to look for them. Most of all, he didn't know that I was already 3 steps ahead of him. I hired Thomas to do something unusual, something that would give me proof. Thomas arrived at my office on a Tuesday morning with a careful expression. The kind of face you wear when you're about to explain something that pushes the boundaries of what most people are comfortable with. He closed the door behind him. "I can get recordings," he said without preamble. "But you need to understand what you're asking for. Once we have audio evidence of Vincent discussing his intentions, you're crossing into territory that requires some creative interpretation of the law. Can you do it legally?" I asked. "Technically, yes," he said. "I have a contact at a local dealership. Vincent takes his Audi in for maintenance regularly. While it's there, I can install what appears to be a maintenance monitoring sensor. It's completely standard. Dealers use them all the time to track vehicle diagnostics. The sensor happens to also record audio. Will it hold up in court?" "That's the lawyer's problem," Thomas said. "My job is to get you the recording." 3 days later, he called me. "I have something," he said. "You need to listen to this alone." I went to my study and closed the door. Thomas sent the file through an encrypted email. I put in my earbuds and hit play. The audio quality was surprisingly clear. I could hear wind noise, the hum of Vincent's car engine, and then Vincent's voice, unmistakably his, but different. The performance was gone. The careful charm had been stripped away. What remained was cold calculation. "Yeah, I'm at the ranch again, playing the beautiful son-in-law," Vincent was saying. "This old man has no idea." There was another voice, female, younger. "Natalie, I assumed." "You sure about the value?" "I've checked the county records 3 times, Vincent said. 500 acres, and he bought it in '94 for peanuts. With Denver development reaching this far out, we're talking minimum $5.5 million. Probably closer to 6 if we play it right. My hand tightened on my phone. He knew. He'd researched. He'd calculated down to specific numbers. "And the old man?" Natalie asked. "He's loaded." Look at this property," Vincent said. "Free and clear. He's been retired for 5 years, lives alone. No debt that I can see. He's probably sitting on a couple million in investments, maybe more. Could be 8-10 million total. That was when I realized Vincent had done more research than I'd imagined. He'd looked at public records. He'd analyzed my financial situation from available data. He'd calculated my net worth almost exactly. The daughter has no clue, Vincent continued. She thinks Daddy's just a regular middle-class retiree. She has no idea about the ranch value or the investments. Perfect. The word perfect made something twist in my chest. So what's the play? Natalie asked. I marry her in September, Vincent said. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing a business transaction. Spend the first year being the perfect husband, the devoted son-in-law. Get him to trust me. Maybe get financial power of attorney under the guise of helping out with business stuff. Old guy lives alone. Who knows what could happen? A fallen accident, some cognitive decline. Before you know it, he's in a care facility. My blood went cold. He wasn't just talking about accessing money. He was talking about, I manage his affairs and she inherits everything. Vincent continued. We'll be divorced before she figures out what happened, and I'll take my half in the settlement. You're a cold bastard, Vincent, Natalie said, and she was laughing. Actually laughing. I'm a practical businessman, Vincent said. Rebecca was a waste of time. Her father caught on too fast. Sarah was better, but her old man had everything in a trust. This one's perfect. Small town guy. No sophistication about protecting assets. It's like he's asking to be taken. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with rage. Pure, controlled rage. I called Thomas immediately. I have it, I said. Every word of it, Thomas confirmed. I listened to the whole thing. He lays out his entire plan. He mentions your age, your assets, his timeline. He discusses getting power of attorney. He talks about a fall or accident. He's not being subtle, and he's definitely not being legal. Will it stand up? I asked. In terms of raw evidence, yes, Thomas said. But here's the problem. The defense will argue the recording was obtained illegally, that the censor was a violation of privacy, all that. A good lawyer could muddy the waters. What you have is evidence. What you need is a witness. Someone who hears it with their own ears and can testify to it. I thought about what Vincent had said on that recording. About getting power of attorney. About accidents. About a care facility. About disappearing to the Cayman Islands with $50 million. He's not going to confess again, I said. Not after this. He'll be more careful now. Or probably, Thomas agreed. But you have one more option. You could confront him directly with this recording. Get him to react. Get him to reveal something new in front of witnesses. I ended the call and sat in my study listening to the recording again. Every word was damning. Every sentence revealed Vincent's true nature. But Thomas was right, a recording obtained through questionable means might not be enough on its own. What I needed was for Vincent to slip up in front of people who could testify to what he'd said. What I needed was for him to reveal his true self to an audience. What I needed was to force him into a corner so tight that his mask shattered completely. 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks until the wedding. I picked up my phone and called Jennifer. We have the recording, I said. It's damning, but it might not be enough legally. I need a new plan. I need to catch him one more time, but this time in front of witnesses. What are you thinking? Jennifer asked. I'm thinking about the wedding, I said. I'm thinking about 300 people watching. I'm thinking about making sure everyone sees exactly who Vincent Hutchinson really is. 3 days before the wedding, Vincent made a mistake. He threatened me. I was in the south pasture checking on some of the older cattle when I saw his Audi come up the drive. Fast. Too fast for someone just stopping by. He parked haphazardly, not bothering with his usual precision, and I knew immediately something had shifted. Vincent didn't lose his composure easily. The fact that he was losing it now meant something had gone wrong. I met him halfway between the barn and the main house. "Martin," he said, his voice tight in a way I'd never heard before. "We need to talk." "All right," I said calmly. "Talk." "I know you're snooping," he said. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "I know you hired someone to investigate me." I didn't deny it. There was no point. The game had entered a new phase. "Is that so?" I asked. "Don't play games with me," Vincent said, his voice rising. "I know exactly what you're doing. You're trying to destroy my relationship with Victoria. You're trying to turn her against me. You're playing the protective father, but what you really are is a controlling old man who can't let his daughter go." I listened. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk because a man who's losing control often reveals things he wouldn't normally say. "Here's what's going to happen." Vincent continued, his charm completely stripped away now. "You're going to stop this investigation. You're going to back off. You're going to let Victoria and me get married. And you're going to smile and act like you're happy about it. Because if you don't..." "If I don't what?" I asked. "If you don't, I'll make sure Victoria never forgives you," he said flatly. "I'll tell her you've been trying to control her, that you don't want her to be happy, that you're so lonely since Helen died, that you're sabotaging your daughter's relationship just to keep her close to you. And she'll believe me, Martin. Because daughters always believe their fiancés over their paranoid fathers." "What else?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "I could accuse you of elder abuse, psychological manipulation. There are laws protecting people from controlling family members. I could paint a very convincing picture of an old man using financial leverage to keep his daughter dependent. Judges hear these cases all the time." "You're threatening me," I said. It wasn't a question. "I'm being realistic." Vincent said, his voice cold now, in a way that matched the coldness of his voice on that audio recording. "You have a choice, Martin. Let this wedding happen and everything is fine. Your daughter marries someone she loves. You get to walk her down the aisle. You get to be the father of the bride. Everyone's happy. Or..." He leaned closer. "Or you keep interfering and I destroy your relationship with Victoria. I make sure she thinks you're a controlling, paranoid, lonely old man. I make sure she knows you tried to ruin her happiness. I make sure that even if she somehow believes your accusations, she'll never forgive you for trying to take me away from her." "Well, you won't do any of that, Vincent," I said quietly. "Watch me," he said. He turned and walked back to his car. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from rage. He'd let the mask slip completely. For just a moment, he'd shown me exactly who he was. Not the charming investment advisor, not the devoted fiancé, the predator underneath. He drove away too fast, gravel spraying behind his tires. I stood in the pasture for a long time after he left, just thinking about what had happened. Vincent had made a critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that discovering my investigation would rattle me into backing off. He'd assumed that threatening my relationship with Victoria would be enough to make me cave. What he didn't understand was that he'd just given me something more valuable than any recording. He'd given me the moment when his true self emerged completely. He'd given me his own words, spoken in anger, spoken in desperation, where he'd revealed his tactics, his threats, his willingness to weaponize Victoria against me. He'd shown me that he had no real defense against what Martin already knew. His only strategy was intimidation. His only power was the threat of turning Victoria against me, which meant that when Victoria learned the truth, when she saw the evidence, when she understood what Vincent had really planned, she would have no doubt about who was telling the truth. He'd made a fatal error. In trying to intimidate me, he'd proven exactly what I'd been saying all along. I called Jennifer. "He just came here and threatened me," I said. "He threatened to turn Victoria against me. He threatened elder abuse accusations. He did everything but explicitly state his plan to take my money." That's good, Jennifer said. That means he's desperate. Desperate people make more mistakes, and mistakes are what we need. What about Victoria? I asked. What about the wedding? That depends, Jennifer said carefully, on whether you're ready to make a move. I looked out at the mountains, at the land Helen and I had built together. I thought about Rebecca Thornton, devastated because her father had protected her. I thought about Sarah Mitchell, confused about why her fiancé had suddenly disappeared. I thought about all the ways Vincent had calculated and planned and prepared to steal from my family. I'm ready, I said. If you're still listening, I'm grateful. Leave me a comment, anything at all. And answer this. If you were me, would you wait or take action right now? One thing you should know, from here on, some details are added for storytelling purposes. The core lesson is real, but not every detail is exactly as it happened. If that makes you uncomfortable, you can stop here. The phone call came at 11:47 p.m. on the night before the wedding. Dad. Her voice was shaking. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I could hear her crying on the other end, that ragged breathing that meant real tears. Not the kind people cry over small disappointments, but the kind that came from something breaking deep inside. Hey, I said gently, sitting up in bed. Helen's side of the bed was still untouched the way I kept it. Some nights I still couldn't bring myself to sleep on her side. What's wrong, sweetheart? Talk to me. I went to his hotel room, Victoria said quickly, the words tumbling out. I know I shouldn't have. I know he asked me not to come until tomorrow, but I wanted to surprise him. I don't know what I wanted. To see if... It's okay. What did you find? Dad, he was on a FaceTime call with a woman, and they were... She stopped, taking a shaky breath. They were talking about you, about the ranch, about the money. My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice steady. Tell me everything. She described how she'd heard Vincent's voice through the partially open door, how she'd positioned herself in the hallway, where she could see into the room through the crack, how she'd taken out her phone and started recording the screen of his laptop, not the perfect angle, but enough to catch both faces, both voices. He said, "Once we have the ranch and the mineral rights, we disappear," Victoria whispered. And then she asked how much it was worth. He said $5.5 million plus another $7 or $8 million in other assets. Dad, he was talking about your life like it was just numbers on a balance sheet. I didn't say anything. I let her continue. He told her you were just a retired old man living a middle-class life, that you had no idea how much you were actually worth. And she asked what would happen to me and Dad. Victoria's voice broke. He said something would happen to you, that he was planning some kind of accident. He called it an accident, Dad, but he was describing something deliberate. The clock on my nightstand glowed red, 11:52 p.m. What kind of accident? I asked, though I already knew what she was going to say. Huh? He said maybe a fall down the stairs, Victoria said, or a stroke, or something sudden. He said these things happen to men your age. Then he would manage the inheritance. He would take everything. I closed my eyes. 40 years of building something. 40 years of Helen working beside me, planning gardens and raising our daughter. All of it reduced to a plan discussed over FaceTime with a woman I'd never met. There's more, Victoria said. They talked about after, about disappearing to the Cayman Islands with $50 million, about a new life. They toasted with champagne, Dad. They laughed about it. Do you still have the video? I asked. Yes, it's on my phone. It's all there. The date and timestamp. Both of them. Everything. I felt something settle inside me, a kind of cold certainty that only comes when you've been proven right in the worst possible way. Okay, I said. Listen to me carefully. I need you to do exactly what we talked about. Do you remember? Yes, Victoria said. At the altar, when he says, I do. Now that's right. You're going to be brave tomorrow. You're going to stand there, and you're going to wait for the moment when everyone is watching. And then you're going to show them who he really is. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I could hear her breathing steadying now. I'm scared, she said. I know, baby. But you're not alone. You've got Jennifer. You've got Thomas. You've got the sheriff. And most importantly, you've got me. I'm going to be sitting in the third row with a clear view of the altar. I'm not going anywhere. What if he tries to? He won't, I said. We've thought of everything. We've planned for everything. Tomorrow we show everyone what we know, and then we let the law do its job. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of the bedroom. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold. Stars were visible above the mountains, the same stars that had been there when Helen and I first bought Whitehorn Ranch. The same stars that had watched over us through good times and bad times. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the pieces we'd carefully arranged would finally fall into place. Victoria would press play on that video in front of 200 witnesses. Vincent would realize that he'd underestimated not just me, but my daughter, and the law would take care of the rest. I picked up the phone and texted Jennifer Walsh one word, tomorrow. She replied seconds later, we're ready. The sky that morning was impossibly blue. I woke before dawn, as I always did, and stood at the ranch entrance, looking out over Whitehorn. The snow had melted 2 weeks ago, and now the fields were turning green. Cattle moved slowly through the pasture, their breath visible in the cool air. In about 12 hours, my daughter would stand before 200 people and make a choice that would define the rest of her life. I walked out to Helen's garden. The roses weren't blooming yet. It was still too early in the season. But the shoots were coming up through the soil, dark and determined. Helen had planted them 20 years ago. She used to say that roses were like people. You could cut them, break them, threaten them with frost and drought, and still they'd come back. Still they'd grow. Helen, I said quietly, kneeling down to touch the soil. I'm about to do something. I hope it's the right thing. The garden didn't answer. The garden never did. But somehow that was enough. At 7 in the morning, Jennifer Walsh arrived. Thomas Price was already waiting in my study. Neither of them looked like they'd slept much. Everything's in place, Jennifer said, setting down a folder on my desk. The sheriff is positioned in the parking area with 2 deputies. They're in plain clothes. No one will see them until we give the signal. The recordings, I asked. Audio is crystal clear. Video is perfect. Thomas pulled out a small encrypted device. I have the hotel security footage too, multiple angles. It's more than enough for a grand jury, Martin. More than enough. I nodded slowly. This was the moment where everything either worked or fell apart. And the statement, I asked. Victoria knows exactly what to do, Jennifer said. She's been through it 3 times. She's ready. At 8:30, my daughter knocked on my study door. She was wearing her wedding dress, a simple ivory gown with lace sleeves that Helen had helped her choose last month. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her eyes were red from crying, but her jaw was set. In her hands, she held the bridal bouquet, white roses mixed with greenery and baby's breath. You ready? I asked. Victoria came and stood beside me. She didn't sit down. She just stood there looking out at the Montana landscape through the window. I keep thinking about what could go wrong, she said quietly. What if he has a lawyer waiting? What if he fights it? What if people think I'm crazy? They won't, I said, because the evidence speaks for itself. What if he convinces people that we fabricated it? I turned to face her. Victoria, I spent 40 years as an engineer. Do you know what I learned? Facts don't lie. Recordings don't lie. Video doesn't lie. People might argue about what things mean, but the facts themselves, those are solid ground. You're standing on solid ground. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm scared, she said. Good, I replied. If you weren't scared, I'd be worried. Fear means you understand what matters. And I want you to know something. No matter what happens today, I'm proud of you. Your mother would be proud of you. She looked at me, then really looked at me. And I saw Helen in her eyes, that same determination mixed with compassion. That same refusal to accept a lie just because it was easier than the truth. Okay, Victoria said. I'm ready. The ceremony was set for 2 o'clock. By 1:30, the chairs were filled. 200 guests had traveled to Whitehorn Ranch for what they thought would be a simple autumn wedding. The flowers were arranged white roses, which made me think of Helen again, and a wooden arch had been constructed near the barn with mountains visible in the distance. The weather was perfect. Not a cloud in that blue sky. Vincent arrived in a black suit, looking handsome and confident. He carried himself like a man who believed everything was going exactly according to plan. He smiled at people. He shook hands with some of my business associates. He was playing the role perfectly. I sat in the 3rd row, exactly where I'd told Victoria I'd be. At 2 o'clock, the music started. The guests stood. And then Victoria appeared at the end of the aisle, and even knowing what I knew, I felt my chest tighten. She was beautiful. She was my daughter. She was brave beyond measure. I stood and walked her down the aisle slowly. Vincent watched her approach, his face arranged in an expression of adoration that I now recognized for exactly what it was: predatory anticipation. He wasn't looking at the woman he loved. He was looking at the key that would unlock everything he wanted. As we reached the arch, Victoria turned to me briefly. Our eyes met for just a moment. Then, without hesitation, she reached into her bridal bouquet and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She pressed it into my hand. My heart stopped. I unfolded it just enough to read the first line. Dad, I recorded everything. I'm ready. I looked at her face, terrified but determined, and I nodded once. She squeezed my hand, then stepped forward toward Vincent. The pastor, Michael Walsh, who had known Helen and our family for 30 years, stood under the arch with his leather-bound book. He smiled warmly at both of them. We are gathered here today, he began, and the familiar words filled the garden. Around me, people were smiling. They were crying happy tears. They believed they were witnessing something sacred. Vincent spoke his vows with perfect sincerity. He talked about devotion and partnership and building a future together. His voice was smooth, warm, convincing. Every word was a lie wrapped in honey. Then came the moment we'd all been waiting for. If anyone here has just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, Pastor Michael said, "Let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The garden was silent. 200 people held their breath. The only sound was the wind moving through the mountains. "Cha, Vincent." The pastor continued, "Do you take Victoria to be your wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish for as long as you both shall live?" Vincent didn't hesitate. "I do," he said, and he smiled at Victoria like he was the luckiest man alive. "Victoria," the pastor said, turning to my daughter, "do you take Vincent to be your wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish for as long as you both shall live?" The question hung in the air like suspended time. Victoria opened her mouth. For a moment I thought she might say, "I do." I thought she might go through with the lie. I thought maybe fear would win. Then she raised her hand. "Wait," she said, her voice clear and steady. I need to stop this. Everything froze. Vincent's smile crumbled. The pastor's hands went still. 200 guests gasped simultaneously, and the sound was like a sharp intake of breath from a single wounded animal. Victoria's hands were trembling, but her voice remained steady. Before I answer, she said, everyone needs to see something. Before I say I do, Victoria said, her voice steady and clear. Everyone needs to see something. The garden went silent. For a moment, nothing happened. Pastor Michael Walsh stood frozen, his hands still holding the leather book. Vincent's face went white, not the pale of shock, but the pale of someone whose carefully constructed world had just begun to crack. Then, from the side of the barn, 2 ranch hands wheeled out a large projection screen. Jennifer Walsh stood beside it, remote control in hand. She'd been waiting for this moment. "What is this?" Vincent demanded. His voice had changed, no longer smooth, no longer controlled. "What the hell is going on?" "Victoria," I said softly. "Go ahead, sweetheart." My daughter nodded. She looked at Jennifer, and Jennifer pressed play. The screen flickered to life. For a moment, there was nothing but the hotel room in the video, a bed, a window showing Denver at night, and then 2 figures appeared on the laptop screen. Vincent was on one side of the FaceTime call, and on the other side was a woman I'd never seen before. She had dark hair, red lipstick, and a smile that suggested she and Vincent had been through this game before. Natalie. The woman Thomas had been tracking for 2 weeks. "So you're sure about this?" Natalie was saying. Her voice came through the speakers, clear as day. "About Martin, I'm completely sure," Vincent replied, and his tone was casual, the tone of a man discussing something trivial, not something that would reshape 3 lives. "Once we get the ranch and the mineral rights, we disappear. Martin won't even know what happened." A gasp rippled through the guests. "But what about Victoria?" Natalie asked. Vincent laughed. It was a cold sound. "She's just a means to an end. She'll get over it. We'll be in the Cayman Islands with $50 million. A new life, a new identity if we need it. And if Martin tries to stop us," Vincent's expression turned darker. "That's the beautiful part. In 3 weeks, something is going to happen to Martin. Maybe a fall down the stairs. Maybe a stroke. Something sudden. These things happen to men his age. After that, I manage the inheritance. I make sure everything goes to my name. Victoria gets nothing." The video continued, but I stopped hearing the words. Around me, guests were on their feet. Some were shouting. One woman was covering her mouth. An older man, someone I recognized as a banker from Denver, was shaking his head in disbelief. "This is edited!" Vincent screamed from the altar. His composure had shattered completely. "This is a fake. Someone doctored this video. This is manipulation." Victoria stepped forward. Her voice didn't waver. "I recorded this myself, Vincent, so," she said. "I was in the hallway of your hotel. I filmed your laptop screen directly. There's no editing. There's no manipulation. Everyone here just heard you plan how you would take everything from my father." "That's not what I meant." Vincent started, but his eyes were darting around the garden, now looking for an exit. On the screen, the video continued. Natalie was laughing. Vincent was pouring champagne. They were toasting to their future. To $50 million, to a life built on lies and calculated cruelty. "I'm leaving," Vincent said. He turned and started walking away from the altar, pushing through the rows of shocked guests. That's when Sheriff James Coleman stepped forward. Deputy Ryan Foster was already moving to block the path toward the parking area. Fancy Hutchinson. James said, his voice formal and clear. Everyone in the garden could hear him. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to cause serious harm." "And this is insane," Vincent spat. "You have no jurisdiction." We have every jurisdiction, Jennifer Walsh said, stepping forward with a folder of documents. We have recordings, we have emails, we have the hotel security footage showing Miss Mitchell entering Vincent's room. We have the full FaceTime conversation. We have enough for a grand jury, Vincent. We also have a witness statement from a previous victim's father. You remember her, don't you? From Denver, he's already provided testimony about your methods. Vincent's face went ashen. Turn around, hands behind your back, Ryan Foster said quietly. For a moment I thought Vincent might fight. I saw his muscles tense, saw him calculate whether he could make it to his truck, whether he could run. But then he looked at the 200 people surrounding him, people he'd lied to, manipulated, tried to impress, and something in him broke. He turned around. The handcuffs clicked shut, with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire ranch. Click, click. The sound of consequences, the sound of reality catching up with lies. You're making a mistake, Vincent said as Ryan led him toward the police car. You don't know who you're dealing with. I'll sue. I'll counter-sue. I have lawyers. Sue it for the courtroom, James said. They placed him in the back of the patrol car with professional efficiency. No drama. No excitement. Just the simple, unadorned reality of a man being taken into custody for crimes he'd committed. I watched the car drive away from Whitehorn Ranch, dust rising behind it on the gravel road. Around me, people were talking, crying, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The wedding that was supposed to be a celebration had become something else entirely, a reckoning. A moment when truth had finally broken through the careful architecture of lies. Victoria came to stand beside me. I put my arm around her shoulders. You did good, sweetheart, I said quietly. She leaned against me and started crying, not tears of fear anymore, but tears of release. The kind of tears that come when you've been holding something inside for so long that finally letting it out feels like drowning and flying at the same time. Pastor Michael Walsh was collecting his things. Jennifer was fielding questions from shocked guests. Thomas Price was already on his phone, probably coordinating with the district attorney's office. But I just stood there with my daughter, watching the mountains, feeling the wind, thinking about Helen and gardens, and the long, patient work of building something real instead of something false. Vincent had come to Whitehorn Ranch looking for easy money. He'd thought he'd found it in an old man with a ranch and a daughter who loved him. He hadn't counted on the fact that the old man had spent 40 years learning how to recognize patterns, how to see the flaw in the design before it brought the whole structure down. He hadn't counted on the daughter being brave enough to record him, to stand up in front of 200 people and say no. He hadn't counted on love being stronger than greed. But that's where he fell. On an altar in Montana in front of witnesses with the truth playing on a screen behind him. That's where Vincent Hutchinson finally understood that some things can't be conned. Some things can't be manipulated or lied away. Some things like family, like integrity, like the simple refusal to accept a lie, are stronger than any amount of money. What happened next was organized chaos. Vincent fought with words and defiance as Ryan Foster guided him toward the police car. His perfect composure had completely shattered. "This is ridiculous," he screamed. "Do you understand who I am? I have rights." "You do," James Coleman said, calmly reading from a card. His voice was steady, professional, the voice of a man who'd done this hundreds of times. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights?" Vincent didn't answer. He just kept protesting his innocence, kept insisting on his innocence, kept claiming that the video was doctored, that it was a setup, that Martin had orchestrated the whole thing. Nobody was listening anymore. The wedding dissolved immediately. The white chairs were overturned, flowers were trampled. 200 guests scattered into shocked clusters, talking frantically, taking videos on their phones, processing what they'd witnessed in real time. Some were crying. Others were angry. A few looked at me with a mixture of respect and pity. Within 30 minutes, 3 news vans pulled up the gravel road toward Whitehorn. Reporters with microphones approached, asking rapid-fire questions. How long did you know? Why didn't you stop the wedding? Did you suspect him from the beginning? I didn't answer. Victoria stayed close to me, her hand gripping my arm. Jennifer Walsh intercepted the most aggressive inquiries, protecting us with the cool professionalism of someone who dealt with media scrutiny before. By evening, every news station in Colorado was leading with the story, "Con artist arrested at wedding ceremony." Whitehorn Ranch scandal. Woman records fiancé's wrongdoing plan. The details were slightly off, but close enough that accuracy didn't matter anymore. Natalie was picked up at the Riverside Hotel in Denver. Thomas had provided the sheriff's department with her room number and description. She actually tried to run, made a desperate dash for the service entrance, but a deputy was already waiting there. Unlike Vincent's theatrical defiance, she was calm during her arrest, already calculating, already thinking about cooperation and plea deals and minimizing her own exposure. Smart woman. Wrong choices. The interrogation room at the sheriff's department was smaller than I expected. Gray walls, no windows, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 uncomfortable metal chairs across from each other. A mirror that wasn't a mirror. A camera mounted in the corner that James Coleman pointed out with professional courtesy. "This is being recorded," he said, "for your protection and ours. Standard procedure." Jennifer Walsh sat beside me, her legal pad already open, pen poised. This was her element, the formal space where words became evidence. James opened his notebook. His questions were methodical, thorough. "I need to ask why you didn't inform your daughter of your suspicions," he began. "Because she needed to see the truth for herself," I said carefully. "If I'd told her what I suspected, she would have been defensive. She might have married him anyway, just to prove a point, to show that she wasn't being controlled. Instead, she discovered the truth on her own terms. That's more powerful. That's real." James wrote something down. Did you encourage her to record him?" "No. I suggested she might find answers if she looked for them. But the decision to record that was entirely her own." Victoria's interview took place in a separate room with a victim's advocate present. Through the glass partition, I could see her walk through everything, discovering Vincent on FaceTime, positioning herself in the hallway, holding her phone steady despite her trembling hands, listening to Vincent and Natalie discuss how they would take control of my affairs and what would happen afterward. She cried during parts of it, not from fear anymore, but from exhaustion. The exhaustion of reliving trauma, of having to translate horror into testimony. The victim's advocate handed her tissues and water. James treated her with the gentleness of someone who understood she'd been through something difficult, even if she'd found the courage to gather evidence against her attacker. When she emerged, her eyes were red, but her spine was straight. Thomas Price arrived in the late afternoon, carrying boxes of evidence. He laid it all out methodically on a second table while James took notes. "This goes back 7 years. Thomas said, his voice steady and professional. 13 confirmed targets across 5 states. 3 of them successfully manipulated into changing wills or trusts before they realized what was happening. 5 more who got suspicious before he could implement his plan. The remaining 5 are still unaware of how close they came." He pulled out a separate folder. "Natalie is the key," he continued. "She's not a victim. She's a partner. They've been working together for at least 3 years. She's the architect. She identifies targets, researches their financial situations, plans the approach. Vincent is the execution. The charm, the seduction, the manipulation. But she's the brain behind it." James whistled low. "So she's more dangerous than he is," Jennifer said. "She's significantly more dangerous." Thomas agreed. "Vincent is motivated by greed and ego. Natalie is motivated by something colder. Intelligence, efficiency. She's perfected a system, and Vincent is just the delivery mechanism. By the end of the day, James had filled 3 notebooks. Rebecca Thornton in San Francisco, Sarah Mitchell in Denver, Jessica Hayes in Phoenix, Lauren Scott in Albuquerque. All of them wealthy, all of them targeted methodically. All of them saved or harmed, depending on how quickly they'd realized something was wrong. James closed his notebook and looked directly at me. His expression was grave. "The district attorney has everything they need," he said quietly. "We have recordings, video evidence, witness testimony, a documented pattern of wrongdoing spanning 7 years. We have conspiracy to cause harm. We have financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. This case is solid." He paused. "Your daughter saved your life, Martin. Do you understand that if this had gone another 2 weeks, if the wedding had actually happened, if you'd signed those documents, Vincent would have had legal authority over your accounts, and you would have had an accident. You'd be gone and he'd be managing your estate." I didn't say anything. I'd already understood that truth the moment I heard Vincent describing what would happen to me. "Thank you," I said finally, "for believing us, for taking this seriously." James nodded. "We take conspiracy to cause harm seriously, Martin, every single time." The days that followed were a blur of media attention and family support. Reporters called the ranch constantly. They wanted Victoria's exclusive story. They wanted tearful interviews. They wanted dramatic reenactments of the moment she realized Vincent was a con artist. Victoria refused every single request. She hung up on them politely but firmly. Some reporters tried going around her through mutual acquaintances. They all got the same answer, no. But the support came from unexpected places. Friends from her college days called. We saw the news. That took incredible courage. Her yoga instructor sent flowers, white roses, which felt like a tribute to Helen. Co-workers from her office in Denver stopped by the ranch, bringing casseroles and pie, sitting with her in the living room, just being present. Several of the wedding guests sent handwritten notes. "What you did was brave. We saw his true face because of you. You protected your father and protected other women." By the 3rd day, Victoria had transitioned from shock to something else. It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was closer to it. The initial trauma was softening at the edges, being replaced by something more manageable, the complex work of processing what had happened and who she'd almost become. I found her sitting in Helen's garden on a Thursday afternoon. The roses were starting to bud. The soil was warm under the spring sun. She was just sitting there staring at nothing in particular. "How are you feeling?" I asked, sitting down beside her. She was quiet for a long moment. "I feel like an idiot, Dad," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but there was pain underneath it. "I should have seen it. I should have known something was wrong." "He was asking all those questions about the ranch, about your finances, about—" She stopped. "How did I miss it?" "You didn't miss anything," I said. "You're not the first person he's done this to, and you wouldn't be the last. Vincent Hutchinson is a professional con artist. He's spent years perfecting his technique. He knows exactly what to say, exactly how to move, exactly what to make people believe. You're not stupid, Victoria. You're human." She turned to look at me then. "Why did you wait so long to tell me?" she asked. "You knew something was wrong. Why didn't you just tell me from the beginning?" This was the conversation I'd been preparing for. This was the one that mattered most. "Because if I'd told you, you wouldn't have believed me," I said carefully. "You would have thought I was being an overprotective father. You would have assumed I was trying to control your life. And you know what, you might have married him anyway just to prove a point. Just to show that you could make your own decisions. But this way," I continued, "you found the truth yourself. You gathered the evidence. You made the choice. And that choice, that courage you showed, that can't be taken away from you. Nobody can diminish it. Nobody can question it. You know what he was because you saw it with your own eyes and heard it with your own ears. Victoria was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the garden carrying the smell of earth and blooming flowers. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the cattle, the ranch hands, the normal sounds of Whitehorn continuing to function despite everything that had happened. "I understand," she said finally. "I don't like it, but I understand. You were trying to protect me by not protecting me." "Exactly," I said. She leaned against me then, the way she used to when she was younger, when the world was simpler and fathers could fix things just by being present. We sat like that for a long time, not talking, just breathing, just existing in the same space while the Montana spring moved around us. "Dad," she said after several minutes of silence. "Yeah, I've been thinking about something, about what comes next." "What do you mean?" She turned to face me. Her eyes were clear now. The shock had faded, replaced by something determined, something purposeful. "See the other women," she said. "Rebecca, Sarah, Jessica, Lauren, the ones Thomas found, the ones he targeted. I want to help them. I want to make sure they know what Vincent did. I want to make sure they understand they're not alone. And I want to help the authorities build cases against him." I hadn't expected that. My daughter, traumatized and heartbroken just days ago, was already thinking about how to help others. "That's a heavy burden to carry," I said carefully. "I know," Victoria replied. "But I'm not carrying it alone. I have you. I have Jennifer. I have Thomas. I have all these people who stood by me. Those women don't have that yet. They need to know that someone survived what he tried to do. That someone won, that they can too." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and I saw Helen. I saw the strength, the compassion, the refusal to accept victimhood as a permanent condition. "Then we'll help them," I said. "Together." She smiled then for the first time in days. It wasn't a happy smile, it was too complicated for that, but it was real. It was her reclaiming something that Vincent had tried to take. 2 months later, Vincent stood before Judge Patricia Hernandez and accepted a plea agreement. The courtroom was small, intimate, in a way that made everything feel more real. I sat in the third row behind the prosecution table, watching my daughter's face. Jennifer Walsh was beside me. Thomas Price was 2 rows back. The district attorney, Patricia Morrison, stood with her folder of evidence, prepared to articulate exactly why this case mattered. Vincent wore an orange jumpsuit. His hair was longer than it had been at the wedding. He'd lost weight. Whatever confidence he'd carried before had been stripped away, replaced by the hollow look of someone forced to confront consequences for the first time in his life. Vincent Hutchinson. Judge Hernandez said, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "You have agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy in planning an act of violence. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Vincent said quietly. "And you understand that by accepting this plea, you are giving up your right to a trial." "Yes, Your Honor." The proceedings took less than an hour. Vincent's attorney argued for leniency. The prosecution presented the evidence, the recordings, the video, the pattern of previous victims. Judge Hernandez listened to it all with the expression of someone who'd heard this story before in different forms. When she rendered her judgment, her voice was steady and clear. "This is a calculated and premeditated crime," she said. "The defendant targeted a vulnerable elderly man for financial exploitation and plotted his removal with clinical precision. The victim's daughter demonstrated extraordinary courage in gathering evidence and bringing this case to justice. The court sentences Vincent Hutchinson to 5 years in prison, suspended to 5 years of probation. Additionally, the defendant is ordered to make full restitution for all financial damages caused and is permanently barred from working in any financial services capacity. She paused, looking directly at Vincent. If you violate any term of this agreement, you will serve your full sentence. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Vincent said. Natalie's sentencing came later that same day. She had cooperated with the prosecution, provided testimony about their methods, and most importantly, admitted that she had also been manipulated by Vincent in the beginning. She'd been his victim before she became his partner. That cooperation earned her a reduced sentence. 2 years, Judge Hernandez said. With credit for time served, the defendant will be eligible for parole in 18 months. But understand this, you chose to continue participating in criminal activity. You chose to target innocent people. Your reduced sentence is a recognition of your cooperation, not a forgiveness of your crimes. When it was over, Victoria came and stood beside me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The weight that had been on our shoulders since Vincent Hutchinson first arrived at Whitehorn Ranch had finally lifted. Victoria didn't go back to Denver immediately. I need time, she said simply. So she stayed at the ranch. She spent her days doing simple things. She would wake early and run through the Montana landscape, her feet pounding against the trail that wound through our property. She'd shower, eat breakfast, then help with the ranch work, not the business side, but the physical work. Feeding the cattle, repairing fence lines, working alongside the ranch hands, exhausting her body so her mind could rest. Slowly, she began to heal. She took long walks through Helen's garden. She sat with me on the porch, and we talked about everything except Vincent. She read books about psychology and manipulation and how people build trust. She began to understand on a deeper level exactly how she'd been targeted, not because she was stupid, but because she was kind. She was open. She believed in people. Those qualities had been her vulnerability, and Vincent had exploited them with precision. But she didn't lose those qualities. She simply learned to temper them with awareness. 3 weeks into her stay, she ran into Emily, a girl she'd known from high school, who was home visiting her parents. They grabbed coffee at the diner in town. Emily had been following the news coverage, recognized Victoria immediately. I can't imagine what you've been through, Emily said, reaching across the table to squeeze Victoria's hand. I can barely imagine it myself, Victoria admitted. But I'm learning. Every day I'm learning something new about myself, about how people work, about trust and vulnerability. That sounds exhausting, Emily said. It is, Victoria agreed. But it's also necessary. She started researching universities that offered graduate programs in psychology. She began to envision a future where she could help people like herself, people who'd been targeted by predators, people who needed to rebuild their understanding of trust and safety. It wasn't a career path she would have chosen 2 months ago, but it felt right now. It felt purposeful. By the 8th week, Victoria was ready. I'm going back to Denver, she told me one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. I know, I said. I've been expecting it, but I'm going back differently, she continued. I'm not going back as the woman I was. I'm going back as someone who's survived something and learned from it. Someone who's going to help other people navigate the same darkness I walked through. I reached over and took her hand. Your mother would be so proud, I said. Victoria smiled, and it was a real smile, not the tentative one from after the wedding, but something deeper. Something that acknowledged both the pain she'd experienced and her choice to transform that pain into purpose. I know she would, Victoria said softly. Spring came again. Helen's garden exploded into color. The roses bloomed wild and beautiful reds and pinks and whites that seemed to glow against the Montana sky. The grass grew thick. Butterflies moved between the flowers with the casual grace of creatures that had never known danger. It was the kind of day that reminded you why people keep living, keep building, keep believing in the possibility of beauty despite everything they've endured. Victoria and I sat on the stone bench, the one with Helen's name carved into the back. We hadn't planned to sit there. It had just happened naturally the way important conversations often do. "How did you know?" Victoria asked. "How did you know Vincent was dangerous?" I took a moment before answering. I wanted to get this right. "I've learned hard lessons in my life," I said slowly. "More than once I've been betrayed by people I trusted. When that happens, you don't just recover, you learn. You learn to recognize the patterns, the way someone's eyes move when they're calculating, the careful questions that seem casual but aren't, the way they build intimacy before they make their move." Victoria was quiet, listening. "Still, when Vincent first came to the ranch," I continued, "I recognized those patterns, not because I'm some kind of genius, but because I've walked that particular road before. I know what predators look like. I know what predators sound like." "Do you regret not telling me straight away?" Victoria asked. "I need to know if you regret that." This was the question that mattered most. This was the question that would determine whether she could truly move forward. "No," I said, and I meant it. "If I'd told you my suspicions, you would have thought I was being an overprotective father. You would have believed I was trying to control your life. You might have married him just to prove that you could make your own decisions. But when you discovered the truth yourself, when you recorded that conversation, when you stood up at that altar that became your truth, that's something nobody can take away from you." Victoria leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat like that for a while, watching the garden, watching the wind move through the flowers. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said eventually. "I know, you're going back to Denver." "Yes, but I'm going back different. I'm going back to school. I want to study psychology. I want to help people who've been through what I've been through." I put my arm around her. "Your mother would be incredibly proud of you," I said. "I'm incredibly proud of you." She didn't say anything, but I felt her lean a little heavier against me, the weight of acceptance, the weight of moving forward. I've spent 70 years on this earth. I've built a ranch from nothing. I've raised a daughter. I've buried a wife. I've faced down a con artist who wanted to take everything from me. And I've learned something that most people don't understand until it's too late. True wealth isn't measured in dollars. I have $12 million in assets. I have 500 acres of prime Montana land with mineral rights that companies are willing to pay for. I have investments and properties and things that would make a lot of people jealous. But you know what I value most? I value the fact that my daughter trusts me. I value the fact that when she discovered the truth about Vincent, she didn't come to me with confusion or doubt, she came to me with clarity and purpose. I value the fact that Helen's lessons about character, about integrity, about the importance of knowing who you are, inside those lessons kept my daughter alive and whole through a crisis that could have destroyed her. Helen and I made a deliberate choice to live modestly. We didn't flaunt our wealth. We didn't teach Victoria that money was the measure of a person's value. We taught her that her worth came from inside, from her character, her kindness, her ability to see the best in people, while also learning to recognize danger. And that internal knowledge, that's what saved her. Not the $12 million, not the 500 acres, not the investments or the mineral rights. Character saved her. Family saved her. The lessons her mother taught her saved her. Vincent Hutchinson came to Whitehorn Ranch looking for an old man with money. He found that old man. But he underestimated what that old man had not in his bank account, but in his heart. He underestimated the strength of the bond between a father and daughter. He underestimated the power of a woman who'd learned to trust her instincts. Money can't buy you safety from predators. It can't buy you the wisdom to recognize danger. It can't buy you the courage to face down someone you once loved and say, "No, I see you now, and I'm not going to let you hurt my family." But character can do all of those things. As the sun set that evening painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, I sat with my daughter in Helen's garden. The flowers were blooming. The world was turning. Spring had come again, as it always does, as it will continue to do long after I'm gone. "You know what the funny thing is," Victoria said as the light began to fade. "What?" I asked. "My money can't buy moments like this," she said. "But it does buy the peace of mind to enjoy them without fear. It buys the freedom to sit in a garden and think about the future instead of worrying about survival." I smiled. She was right. "So what's the wisdom?" I asked. Victoria took a moment before answering. "The real wealth isn't what you own," she said finally. "It's who you love, and the lengths you're willing to go to protect them." I pulled her close as the last light faded from the sky. Somewhere in the distance, the cattle were settling in for the night. The ranch was secure. The work was done. And all around us, in the fading light, Helen's roses bloomed on into the darkness, beautiful, enduring, alive. That's all any of us really have. I've shared this story with you because I believe it matters. I made mistakes. I waited too long to act. I kept silent when I should have spoken sooner. Don't be like me. If you see the warning signs, trust your instincts. Don't wait for perfect proof. Don't hesitate to protect the people you love. Here's what I've learned. Money means nothing without character. Family means everything. And God, I thank God every single day He gave me the wisdom to recognize danger, the strength to face it, and the grace to help my daughter overcome it. I pray every morning for guidance. I pray every night in gratitude. And I pray always that others facing similar darkness will find the courage Victoria found. This is the real lesson. True wealth isn't what you own. It's who you love and how fiercely you protect them. Don't make wealth your God. Make family your priority. Make truth your foundation. Make character your legacy. If this story resonated with you, I need your voice. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you're thinking, share your own experiences, or simply let me know you were here. If you found value in this, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the stories that matter. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Your time means everything. One final note. The story you've just heard contains some fictionalized details created for educational and protective purposes. While the core truth and the lessons are entirely real, some names, timelines, and specific circumstances have been changed. If any part of this story triggers you or makes you uncomfortable, please step away and choose content that better serves your well-being.